I want to welcome you to Urban Strategy in the Present Tense, which is a webinar series uh, coming out of Drexel University, empowered by the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation. And my name is Andrew Zitzer. I'm an associate professor at Drexel. I run our Urban Strategy Master's Program, which is the namesake of this Urban Strategy in the Present Tense series. And I ask you to stick around because very close to the end of the hour, I will come back on to just say a few words about how this program actually is a symbol of our academic vision in our program, which is really to think about urban systems and leadership and problem solving, and the recognition that nothing happens in isolation, that the work that happens in Parks and Rec has intimate connections to the outcomes of our young people, and the work that happens in education has consequences for our tax base, and the work of making sure our streets are safe has implications for transportation and a million other things. And so the beauty of this series is that we're able to bring people in conversation who think in a big picture way, but have very, very specific applied work and stories that they can tell about their careers and their work as what we call urban strategists, which is a term we invented for these amazing people who give their labor and their love to our city. And so it's a tremendous honor and a pleasure to invite Kathryn Lovell to join us today to share some stories from her work and her work that continues to change and evolve as the city changes and evolves, in conversation with our friend and colleague Patrick Morgan. And you guys have a long history together and so much to share. So rather than introducing you, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick to do that. And I'm going to sit back and listen raptly and attentively to your conversation. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, like Andrew said, I think we go back to when you started at the Conservancy? When, like,
Almost
oh
15
gosh,
years. Almost 15 years.
are we that? Is it that old? That
I
we're
mean,
that
you
old?
are. I've aged gracefully.
It's- well said. Well said. Well, thanks everyone for being here. And we will have some time for questions later. So I think you can, we have our friends and colleagues, Tom and Hazel, behind the scenes, taking some questions for those who have them. I think you can drop them into the chat or just do it the old fashioned way and write it down. But Kathryn and I will kind of riff a little bit and then we'll have some questions later. First off, thanks so much for doing this. And we have a big topic. So, Philly meets the world, the power of public space. So I guess to kind of kick things off, I wanted to start by asking you to look back on your time as Philly's Park and Rec Commissioner, which is really only the second in the city's history. So look at
First woman, if we're going to do that too.
But looking back on your kind of your time at as Park and Rec Commish now, roughly 2 years, I guess, removed, like how do you see the role that public space played on the trajectory of the city? I think that interconnectedness that Andrew kind of spoke to in his opening, like how do you see the role that public space played on the trajectory of the city over the last 20 to 25 years? And maybe start off by speaking to how the city's landscape has really so fundamentally changed and how public space has changed our quality of life.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know us, Patrick and I work together at Parks and Recreation. I'm the president and CEO of the Philadelphia Visitor Center, have been here for the last year and a half, but prior to that spent about 8 years in the Kennedy administration with Patrick as the Parks and Rec Commissioner, and Patrick was our first deputy. And then prior to that, I ran the Fairmount Park Conservancy. So have been in the parks and public space world almost 15 years. It's sort of, I'm a lifelong Philadelphian, right? Like I grew up here and I'm raising my family here. And to think about, the changes that have happened in terms of public space in our city in the last 20, 25 years, it's really unbelievable, right? It's so different. I think it's changed the landscape, certainly physically, but I also think it's had an impact on us socially, economically, and when you think about like all of the changes that have happened, all of the incredible new public spaces that have happened, and transformations in public space that have happened, like just in Center City, river to river. You think about Dilworth Park and Love Park and sister cities, and then you think about the incredible changes along the waterfront, right, with the design, the plan for the Central Delaware, but also going all the way up to the work that Riverfront North has done, right, in the Northeast along the waterfront. And then you think about the Schuylkill River Trail, right, and that didn't exist, right? It's a new asset for us as Philadelphians, and it's hard to remember a time when that didn't exist. And when it was created, it was just meant for recreation, right? But it's become a commuter trail now. People are using it, to get to and from work. And to know that, there's these incredible plans for that trail to extend all the way down to, across the river and over to Bartram's, it's just, it's really, really fundamentally changed our city. And I think it's in all positive ways, And, it's awesome to think that you and I, Patrick, played a very small role in that. But all the more reason that, I think the two of us have become really staunch advocates for, certainly for the needs, but also for the potential that still exists for us to do even more in terms of public space.
Yeah, I think, you said, and we've kind of talked about this, like really during that time, one can argue that Philly has experienced a public space kind of revival or renaissance. And it's kind of those spaces that you mentioned, right? And I think really kind of, you know, anchored by, in some ways, like high quality space defining a downtown center city revitalization, right? And then kind of going, river to river. But I think the other interesting thing, and maybe this is my own kind of like Philadelphia bias, is that, and you used to talk about this too as commissioner, because in that job, you had the purview of kind of leaving the city, right? In terms of, connecting with other, commissioners, whether they be in New York or Chicago or LA. And, really kind of the eyes of Philly were on, the eyes of the world were on Philly in terms of like, we have a good public space game here, right? And I think sometimes as Philadelphians, it's hard to kind of recognize that. And I think, we experienced that via the Civic Commons like learning network, and, having, being able to kind of see the public space work kind of reflected back in people's own, experience coming here, right? To kind of study what Philly, was doing. And, the department under your leadership hosted, not just local conferences on public space, but like national conferences on public space. So, I think that that's significant too, just to kind of amplify that, really, I think, at that time and continue, Philly is getting a lot of good kind of attention around its public spaces.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is our design community. Like, we have an incredible design community here, as we know. Well, I mean, first of all, back to your other point, we're just so cynical, and we're so self-deprecating about ourselves in Philly, right? But you're 100% right. Like, when we were able to travel, throughout the country, to other cities, people were, so impressed with what has happened. It's a national story, right? There's a national narrative out there about what Philly has been able to accomplish in terms of building and transforming great public spaces. And that is in such large part to this incredible design community that we have here. Certainly, landscape architects, brilliant landscape architects, amazing engineers, who make this work happen, but also to these incredible nonprofit leaders that work alongside, those in city government, right? Whether it's, Joe Cyranick at SRDC working alongside the streets department, or, it's the Conservancy working alongside Parks and Rec, or Bartram's Garden, or, the Discovery Center. Like, it's just countless number of nonprofit organizations that exist to support these incredible city assets, right? Some of them were created out of just sheer need, because the city has been so tremendously under-resourced in terms of its ability to manage and maintain public space. And, and some of them have come out of just, just great advocacy and tremendous support from the private sector and from individuals who want to support their public spaces, like Friends of the Wissahickon, which has been around for over 100 years. But I also think that it's certainly the incredible public spaces and the people that have created them. But there's also this amazing respect that we have for our community engagement and how engaged our residents and our like individuals are in our public spaces. And I think back to the 1990s when Mike DeBerdinas, for those who don't know, was the recreation commissioner at the time, then became the first Parks and Rec commissioner. And then, managing director, also ran DCNR for the state. Mike, when he became recreation commissioner, basically worked with PHS and Philly Green at the time, to basically create these park friends groups, to help manage and maintain and steward these parks that had really fallen into just complete disrepair and underuse. And that Park Friends Group has now grown to be thousands of people representing hundreds of unstaffed neighborhood parks. And that network does not exist in other cities, right? There are big conservancies in cities like New York, conservancies for parks, but this like grassroots volunteer network of parks that are in, poorer neighborhoods, more affluent neighborhoods, middle income neighborhoods is just really unique to Philly. And I think something that, we don't talk about enough in terms of their impact on public space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, you can't talk about public space renaissance or revival without mentioning the kind of the community leadership of the Park Friends networks. And again, I remember, and you might too, people coming from all over just to be like, how does Philly do that? Right? Like, how do you, not just start that, but sustain it? And I think now, community gardens are incorporated into the Park Friends network. And kind of the other side of that coin is, the rec advisory councils, with kind of existed, for, many, many years. And, a little different from the Park Friends network, which I think are more kind of like the, clean and green, right? The advisory council's doing programming, doing amazing programming. But I think, part of the challenge, and we can get into this maybe other questions, is like, like how much is, because of the historic underinvestment, right? How much is the system kind of relying on those community members to do kind of the basics, right?
Yeah.
Where in other cities that we've been to, and definitely international cities, it's like, oh no, that's just something the city does, right? We don't have volunteers doing that.
No, there's no question. And but just going back real fast to the recreation advisory councils, they were fun fact, they were started by Robert Crawford, who was the recreation commissioner here. It was like the patriarch of recreation commissioners, right? Like he basically, is one of the fathers of modern, the modern recreation industry in the country. And National Parks and Recreation Association has an award named after him, an election named after him. And he was the Parks and Rec commissioner from like 1950 to 1980. I think he crossed over 4 or 5 mayors, which is unbelievable. And I read his autobiography, and he talks about in the 1960s how he started these recreation advisory councils because he wanted to make sure that the programming that they were creating was relevant to the communities they were serving. And he noticed a void in a South Philadelphia community where he didn't have enough women engaged in programming. And that's actually how the Parks and Rec ceramics program came out, because Italian housewives didn't feel that they had the autonomy to go and do programming in the middle of the day when they should be keeping their house. And so they started a ceramics program to give them something domestic to work on, but my point is that's how they informed the type of programming that would happen at those rec centers. And to think about that level of community engagement and embedding that level of community engagement into the way that the Department of Recreation did business, and planned its programs was totally innovative, and we really have Commissioner Crawford to thank for that. Now I forget the other part of what we were talking about.
That's all right. We're riff. Like we'll just keep
going.
That's
okay, good.
I think from And again, thank you for introducing yourself. I forgot to introduce myself.
Yeah, you should tell them who you are too.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, but I think our
Patrick
bios
Morgan,
are
ladies
okay.
and gentlemen.
Hey, thank you. Everyone behind me, be quiet and freeze. Thank you. All right, so I'm Patrick Morgan. Again, I had the pleasure of working alongside and with Kathryn for a number of years, not just at Parks and Rec, but I ran the Knight Foundation here in Philadelphia, which at the time had a very much focused public space investment strategy, coming off of the brothers who own newspapers in 26 cities across the country. In Philly, they owned the Inquirer, the Daily News, and the Bulletin when it existed. And really, they were looking at public space as the lever to support informed and engaged communities. And then, while Kathryn was at the Conservancy, we worked together when I was with Mike DiBerardinis, kind of at the dawn of the merged Parks and Rec department. Philly is a city of many first, but we're also a city of many last, and we were one of the last big cities that have a separate park department and a separate rec department until those two were kind of, collided together, so to speak.
Yeah, you call it a merger. I called it a collision, but
and then really a lot of the work that Kathryn took on was, once that collision happened, right? Okay, like how do you live together, basically? Currently I'm at Drexel. I do a lot of work with Andrew, who did our intro via the Westfall School and the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation, which is a Drexel-based kind of university, think/planning tank, so to speak. And a lot of the work that we do is still kind of focused in on public space, public realm, planning, research, writing. And I guess if I could take that first question too, I guess partly my reflection upon leaving, Park and Rec, because I left a little bit after you did, was that the role at Drexel, I kind of have the opportunity to dig more into like the research and the studies that really back up the social, economic, environmental, public health impacts of public space, which I think we kind of talked about a little bit. And, we're pulling together some of that research and studies for a public space forum next month that we're doing. Kathryn's involved with it, with Penn's Fels Institute of Government. So just kind of trying to create a big room of public space practitioners. But some of the research that really stands out to me is last May, the Surgeon General released a report about the epidemic of loneliness in our country. And they compared its negative health effects to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, which is like 15 cigarettes a day in terms of like the epidemic of loneliness. And their number one prescription was, social infrastructure. It was, parks, public spaces, places that kind of bring us together, not on our screens, even though we're on a screen right now, but, face-to-face interaction. And recently Drexel's Dornsife Public School of Public Health published a study linking green space and increased neighborhood health and safety benefits, which I think there's been a number of kind of studies out there on that, but this is kind of an updated one. So I think we can kind of, the research and the studies backs up that the power of public space is real. So my next question, Kathryn, is, so I think we saw the power of public space, during our time together at Parks and Rec. And I think especially as you led the department through the COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw park usage jump anywhere between 50% to 1,300%, right? If you're talking about the drives or the Schuylkill River Trail, rec centers were converted into food pantries and digital access learning centers when schools couldn't open. Play streets, and I think we have a photo of it, became super play streets. Even at the time, I think it was like March of 2020, Inga Saffron wrote a piece that said, let us remember it was our parks that enabled us to endure this crisis. And I remember kind of our time at Parks and Rec, we talked ultimately about BC and AC, right? Before, before COVID, after COVID. So I'm wondering, like, what were some of your takeaways from those years, right? And, what do you think is next or should be for Philly's public spaces?
I mean, I think there's no better topic if you really want to talk about the power of public space. there's no better topic than to talk about what happened during COVID in Philly in Parks and Rec, right? Because I mean, I think when we, when I used pre-AC or BC before COVID, when we talked about the power of public space, again, it was about that, like, how we can engage communities through parks and how parks level the playing field in communities and bring people together and how the economic development impact, of parks and the community development impact, all good, all important. Then COVID happens, and like exactly what you said, like all of a sudden, restaurants close and all retail closes and schools close and then churches close, right? And yet what stays open? Parks, right? And in Philly, rec centers. And it was wild, right? And we turned rec centers into food pantries, right? And then we turned them into meal centers. And then when we had to get kids back to school and the schools weren't open, somehow rec centers became schools, even though we didn't have internet, and that's the way kids were learning. And it was a crazy time. And then you're right, when you needed testing sites, we used rec centers. The first vaccine site was at a rec center. And so I say all that to say that, what did we learn? I remember, coming out of COVID, that first budget that we created, like the first budget in COVID was a disaster. It was all stripped down. We lost 20% of our budget. But then as we were building back and, the relief money was coming in, I was so confident, like bullish on this idea that, given everything that we did during COVID, that certainly at this point in time, we were not just going to see an increase in our budget finally, right? Being one of the most underfunded parks and rec systems in the country, right? But I had this insane, naive idea that potentially the whole narrative around parks and recreation as an essential service was going to change nationally, and spoiler alert, it didn't. And we did not get an increase in our budget. And we have not yet shifted this narrative. And that to me is a pain point that I carry with me to this day. This image is from Play Streets. And I remember distinctly sitting in a conference room when the rest of the city is working from home, and we're talking about it was like this realization that summer was going to be canceled in the city of Philadelphia. Schools were closed, summer was basically going to be canceled. Pools weren't opening, right? And we were like, well, this could be a disaster, right, for young people in this city. And so we already had this model, this process for Play Streets for getting meals to folks. For 50 years. We would send meals out to these blocks in Philly, and these block captains who would receive the meals and distribute the meals, this whole system that we had a massive meal distribution process in the summer. And we decided that we would enhance that with what we were calling super Play Streets. And we raised all this money in minutes. And we created just like everyday block parties on these blocks. And it was magical, and we literally saved summer that year. And gave kids something positive to remember about COVID, which was we brought play to them. We knew that it wasn't safe for them to come and play inside at a rec center. Wasn't safe for them to go play inside their friends' houses. Libraries were closed, no organized sports. But, the health department was on board with us keeping people on their blocks, right? And doing things in a social distance way as much possible outdoors, and creating this fun. And we had tons of partners who helped with this, and it was all hands on deck, and it was really positive. So we didn't change the world, but I think we did. I think we saved summer that year.
And I think, and I remind, I don't know if you remember, Miss Powell, in so far as like there was a shooting that happened as a Play Street was setting up. And I recall, and I mean, you should share the story, but how she talked about what the power that the Play Street had to save the summer for that block.
That's what happened. Like so it was like right before we were ready to kick off this huge initiative, and and it was there was 11:30 in the morning. Our staff was going to set up for the Play Street, and somebody was shot on the block, and literally the woman who was the volunteer like went, called the police, went to help stop help with the wound. It was insane.
Yeah.
Our staff were, all of a sudden first responders, and when I found out about it, we had to make an assessment. Like, do we cancel the play street? And so I'm, of course, I reacted and said, I think we got to cancel it. I don't think we can do this. This isn't safe. And the volunteer, called us, and she was like, "Oh no, we cannot cancel this play street. This is what happens here. And it's horrible, but this is the one thing that gives these kids joy, and
Yeah.
you cannot cancel joy. I will not let you cancel joy on this block." And we were like, "Okay, we'll be back tomorrow." And that's what we were about. That's another thing that we don't talk enough about parks and recreation, right? Like, it's certainly, there's so many environmental benefits to public space. There's social and economic benefits, but it also brings joy. It brings joy. And going back to your comment, Patrick, about loneliness, we need more joy. We need more joy in our lives. And we always tried not to lose sight of that at Parks and Rec. Like I would always say, we're the slides and swings guys, right? We bring fun and joy. So while yes, we also deliver meals and we do a lot of really important stuff, we can't lose sight of the joy.
Yeah. And yeah, I remember, Mitch Silver in New York would kind of talk about, being the Department of Joy, right? And but I think all this kind of speaks to the essentialness of, public space. And that's really a takeaway that I think that you tried to kind of shift a narrative, right, of public spaces being nice to haves and really about public spaces being, must haves.
Yes.
And I think, if we didn't kind of see that during COVID, I don't know when the hell else we're going to see that, quite frankly.
Yeah, but again, I think the problem is that it has not translated to public support in terms of finances. Like, it just hasn't,
Yeah.
and for us not to be able to fix that, it continues to be really mystifying for me.
Yeah, no, same here. And I think, again, from, kind of the research side of things at Drexel, I mean, the data is there. I mean, all you have to do is look at the Trust for Public Lands Park Score. And I think, again, in a city, that prides itself on being first because of historic underfunding of our of our public space system, we're the 32nd, right?
And
Like,
I have a bone to pick with that park score, and we're
I,
doing much more like a podcast than a webinar. But my bone to pick with that park score is that they also lump in the volunteer hours, and they count that as part of the contribution, right? So,
Mhm.
they're counting volunteer hours as cash essentially, and that
Yeah.
ups our, that looks like we're contributing a far more amount to our Parks and Rec system per person than we actually are. And
Yeah.
so I disagree with that, because I think it shows that we're healthier than we are, right? Because we have this incredible volunteer base.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That we kind of spoke to, again, the people who are, kind of holding back the dam, basically. But even kind of stripping that out, I think the latest number I remember is just looking at the city spend. So again, you pull out what you just kind of the sweat equity, and it's like $60 per resident. That is essentially kind of city dollars for,
Wow.
park and rec.
Wow, that's
Um,
crazy.
well, it's crazy because it's like Baltimore is $124
Yeah.
like per resident, right? Like Atlanta is $162 per resident. Like, we're not even talking like Chicago money or like DC or New York money. So, I think it's one of those things that, like, at some point that has to be, whether it's a dedicated funding or, whatever it is, like, that has to be kind of addressed. So, but we don't have time to do that here. I'm sorry.
That's a whole other webinar, but I'm here for it.
Amen. No, I think some of it is like, we got to up, and I say this is the role of kind of like higher ed, is like some of the research on, the economic, social, environmental benefits, right, has to be kind of continually updated, revised, amplified. So, but I wonder if we can kind of shift things to the Parkway. And when we worked together on the Reimagining the Ben Franklin Parkway planning effort, which the website is still alive, phlparkway.com. You can go to it. I remember David Brandley, who's an architect and art historian at Penn. He talked about Rocky running down the Parkway and up the art museum because, the Parkway was an obstacle, right? Like, the steps were an obstacle to be overcome. right? Like Rocky wasn't doing that because the Parkway is a great place or he wanted to go visit the art museum. He was doing it because it's an obstacle to overcome. And I kind of feel like that sums up the Parkway as a space, right? It's a challenge, it's an obstacle for people. And, I think from more Park Less Way to helping to start up the Oval seasonal pop-up, which is now kind of a seasonal tradition for the city. Like you and I have been kind of tinkering with the Parkway for a while now. So with that, like what have you learned from all this work and processing? And like, how do you see those lessons shaping the Parkway's future? And here we get a great shot of this Oval seasonal pop-up.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like many things in Philly, like, the Parkway never really reached its full vision and potential. It was created with one vision, one really bold vision. It changed over time based on needs and interests, right? And now we're trying to get it back to that initial vision, right? And but change is very hard in Philly, right? But it is possible. And the good news is it's not always catastrophic. you know, we we when the we did this study when I was at the Conservancy, and you were at Parks and Rec. Not study, but a plan called More Park Less Way. The idea was, how do we shift the use, the high level use of the Parkway to be less about cars, right? Less about a thoroughfare and a highway, and more about activation and pedestrian and cyclists and safety, right? And there were some recommendations made for some early action projects. One of them being what we're seeing on the screen here, which is like, if that surface parking lot that somehow was built at the base of our Champs-Élysées, what if that wasn't a surface parking lot? And what if that was a park, right? What if we can close our eyes and reimagine that as a beautifully landscaped and designed park? How could that be activated? And so we turned the surface parking lot for the past 10 summers into a park, right? And and we created, it was creative placemaking. That's all it is, but then one summer we decided, after we had done the Oval for a couple seasons, that we were now going to try to close the outer lanes of the Parkway. And if you remember that, at that point I was Parks and Rec Commissioner, if you remember the resistance that we got for that, right? Not from residents, but from, like the police, who were like, you're going to back traffic up to Delaware Avenue, and the world was going to end, when we closed these outer lanes. And it didn't. It really didn't. And that I think those proof of concepts, and trying to just help people along, and seeing how these small iterative changes can happen, and we can get used to them, and life can go on, and ultimately this is for the betterment of our city and the betterment of the space. It makes it more accessible, it makes it more usable, it makes it safer, and it brings more joy, and that's, I think, that's, in a nutshell, the big plan around the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. How do we really reclaim it as an extraordinary public space, the extraordinary public space that it was intended to be, right? How do we activate it in really positive ways, so that it's not just dominated by cars, but that it's dominated by people and positivity, and it's not just a thoroughfare, but it is the destination. And it's not just the destination 3 months a year. It's not just the destination on the 4th of July, or during the big concerts, right? Or for the walks and runs, but it's a true destination year round, for the 70,000 plus people that live within a 10-minute walk of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway.
Yeah. Yeah, and really it's their park, right? It's their neighborhood park. And I remember, working on More Park Less Way when you were at the Conservancy. I was at the city. Shout out to Harris Steinberg, who runs the Lindy Institute. They helped to, shepherd that process through, in addition to the subsequent plan for the Parkway, which is more about, the permanent, and permanent, changes to the Parkway, right? So how do you go from pop-up to permanent? And I think, just kind of reflecting on that, and you mentioned it, Kathryn, like, change happens not on the timeline that we want. And I remember like, many times we would lament, and probably stronger than lament, um, the change of, things in the city, right? And not just kind of city processes, but bureaucracy, right? And again, change doesn't always happen on the timeline that we want. But I think, if you look at the context of something like the Parkway, it's over 100 years old, right? But, I think there's a number of kind of, singles and doubles that are now starting to build momentum. And, just recently was announced, what, $23 million,
$1 million.
coming, hopefully coming from the feds. Exactly, right. But that's a whole other webinar. But in all seriousness, I think, it's a testament to, all those kind of singles and doubles, and, and to your leadership. And again, real shout out to, Mike Carroll, from Otis, God keep him, because he's the one who's been, along with yourself and others, kind of championing this and seeing, the possibilities, not just for the Parkway, but really for something like the Oval, and ultimately using that, you know, initial investment from the feds to connect it. So to jump those, what, 4, 8 lanes of traffic,
Yeah.
between, the Oval and the Art Museum steps. So
Yeah, I see Nick Anderson's on this too. So huge shout
oh,
out
okay.
to the Parkway Council and Nick for his leadership there, because the Parkway Council itself has evolved tremendously over the last few years. And it's a great testament to that organization and all of the leaders of all those cultural institutions who, have really put so much time and energy into helping push a plan forward for the future of this space. So thank you, Nick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And be that again, and you would always say this as commissioner, like, big stuff doesn't happen by yourself, right? Big stuff doesn't happen alone. It takes a lot of partnerships, inside, outside. So yeah, thank you. I actually can't see who's here. So thank you for the backup on the shout outs. Staying on the Parkway, so the Rocky statue, right? And this, there you go. All right, that a little uptick there. And the steps, right? So it's a global, it's a global fandom, right? And I've heard you kind of talk about as many as 4 million visitors a year go to the Rocky statue, right? Which is twice as many, right, as the Liberty Bell, essentially the birthplace of American democracy, right? Like, the statue is a space that's known to Philly and around the world, and really it doesn't matter the weather, the time of day, oh, there he is. Could be Christmas Day, people will be at the Rocky statue.
Yeah.
It's a monument to a Philadelphian who never lived in a city with real boxing heroes, right? Like real boxing legends. So my question to you is essentially like, why? Like, why do millions of people visit the Rocky statue? And I ask you that because I consider you an expert. You just wrapped up the first ever Rocky Fest. I mean, I heard you on the BBC. So like that thing didn't go national. Rocky Fest went international, maybe intergalactic. But your expertise via Rocky Fest, like what is going on here? And
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I talked about this so much because Rocky Fest got, such incredible press, as you mentioned. This is not a Philadelphia thing, right? This is so far beyond us in Philadelphia. This mythical figure, right? Because I think that is what Sylvester Stallone actually wrote with this film was a myth. This mythical figure is a global icon, right? And this film, 50 years old, right, in 2026, it resonates so deeply with us as humans, and we think of it as an American dream, and I think for the global community, people do really connect that with Philadelphia and this idea that this American dream happened here. But I also think it's just about the tenacity of the human spirit, and so I think, I mean, I love, I think that it is beyond time for us as a city to stop sort of eschewing our connection to Rocky and to celebrate it for what it is. Do I want as many people to feel connected to Independence Hall? Yes, but we know that that didn't celebrate everyone. Independence Hall, right? Not everybody was free when that paper was signed there, and so different things mean different things to different people, and that's okay. But I think going back to your original point in the conversation, it's not just about that statue. Yes, people are visiting the statue, but they're also running those steps. It is that is the that's the experience that people want. They want to run those steps, right? And it's become just a rite of passage, that people want to come here and do. We have AI data, that shows that we see a percentage of people who are coming to the steps either right from the airport or going right to the airport, which means people are on like a layover for a few hours and they're going to one place and they're coming to run those steps. They're coming to get their
That's,
picture with that statue.
that's great.
Yeah, and I think that I think we're leaning into this as a visitor center. We're meeting the people where they are, and we're celebrating it in new ways with Rocky Fest. And I want to give Sasha Suda, who's in this picture, a huge shout out, the director of the art museum, because she is really embracing the museum's connection to this film and to this myth, if you will, right? I think it's just symbolic of our city, and it certainly draws people here, and I think it means a heck of a lot to us as Philadelphians. That is not to say that we shouldn't celebrate those real life boxers, because our boxing
Mhm.
history, as I know very well as former head of Parks and Rec, the boxing community here in Philadelphia is rich, it is vibrant, it is historic, it is world renowned.
Yeah.
And there are incredible stories to tell about that boxing community as well as famous boxers like Joe Frazier.
Yeah, and I think you did a little bit. You did some of that during the Rocky Fest, where you kind of had the real
Real
life
life Rocky.
Rockies,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and the murals. And I'm a proud graduate of Rocky U, so you can't see it. I just made myself disappear. But anyway, so I got to pick up the pace because we have some questions in the chat, which is great. So maybe one or two for you, and then we can kick it over to the chat if that's all right.
Yeah.
But I think, thinking about our conversation, I kind of kept coming back to, and I don't know if this is actually said or just an urban legend now at this point, but Laurie Olin, who I don't think I have to introduce Laurie Olin for this room, but has this quote, like, people love Paris, not because it was built for tourists, but because it was built for Parisians. In your role leading the Philadelphia Visitor Center Corporation, you're a hub, you're a global ambassador for the city, and you're aiming to attract visitors while also reconnecting Philadelphians with iconic spaces like you just talked about, right? But also like the Independence Hall historic area. So I'd love for you to kind of reflect on that quote, and how do you balance creating spaces that feel meaningful for residents while also serving visitors?
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I am in a national park every day, and it's not a park that we feel connected to as Philadelphians. This is Philadelphia's national park, right? And it's a huge, vast section of green space and a really accessible part of our city that, is rarely used by Philadelphians. And that's a problem. I mean, it's great that we have visitors coming from all over to the historic district, but I do wish that more Philadelphians felt connected to this space and felt some ownership over this space. And we're just starting to think about ways that we can help support that. Because I do think that it's just we're really lucky as a city to have 11% of our land mass is parks, and we all I think we have over 90% of our residents that live within walking distance of a park. But over here, Market East, if you will, like we don't have too many parks. Chinatown doesn't have a park besides Franklin Square. Franklin Square is really the only park over here besides the waterfront. Which we're tremendously excited about the cap. But we have little pocket parks, but not huge parks. And so I think really important to better connect people. It's hard because the National Park Service has a lot of rules, and they're very different from Parks and Public Rec rules, Parks and Rec rules. about what you can and can't do in this sacred space. But we tried something this summer, which we're going to continue to do, which is movies on the mall. And we showed National Treasure on Independence Mall. And we had almost 1,000 people come out for that. We opened a beer garden this past summer called Liberty Garden, which has been a great success. We know, Patrick, from our experience with Parks on Tap at Parks and Rec, people like to drink in parks, right? And let's be okay with that. During Welcome America, there's amazing events that happen, like our gospel on the mall. And so I think there's more and more that we can do to think about how we positively activate the space. And I think 2026 can give us some good reasons and good excuses to do that.
Yeah, and I think so. Looking ahead to 2026, so the city's gonna. I don't know if everyone has a deep appreciation for like what is coming, right? But the city's gonna be is gonna be hosting FIFA World Cup matches, which I think most people know, but also the MLB All-Star Game, celebrations for the country's 250th. Seemingly every major conference in the galaxy is going to be here. So like company is
National
coming.
Parks and Rec Association conference is coming in 26. 15,000 Parks and Rec people are coming.
Fantastic commercial. Like, yeah, company's coming. It's coming big time. So like I love to kind of get your take on like what do you think is going to be created or highlighted for Philadelphians that will also attract tourists, right? And you kind of mentioned some of this, like what you're seeing, what you're trying to do with the historic park in the area,
Yeah.
but like serving as both spaces for residents and visitors during such a pivotal year, and then really kind of carrying on beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely going to be, so much that attracts people to come to Philly during that year. And I think you're right that we have to make sure that we're also giving everyday Philadelphians a chance to celebrate and find out how they want to celebrate, right? And help make those celebrations special and help make them happen. We want everybody to be a part of this party. And most importantly, we want there to be a great return on this investment that we're making, right? Of time, talent, and treasure to get ready for 2026. And we want people to, I hope that it generates a higher level of civic pride for local residents, right? That we come off of 2026 with, just feeling positive and about our city and positive about the trajectory of our city. And I hope that for visitors, that they have, this is going to be a big chance for Philadelphia to be on, to build its global profile. And whether it's people coming for the World Cup or just, the celebrations that are going to happen, being on a national stage. I mean, Congressman Brendan Boyle called for a session of Congress to happen here on Independence Mall in the hall, right? So a special session of Congress. So I think there's going to be so many eyes on us that we have to really make sure that translates into people coming, staying longer, telling a friend what a great experience they had, spending more money, coming back. Those are the things we really need to make sure happen. And for local residents, we have to, like I said, we just want to give them a great experience and make sure that they feel, really connected to this in positive ways.
Yeah. And I think kind of some of the work you're leading around the ambassadors, like local residents really being, because it's one thing to kind of see an ad for something, right? It's another thing to have a relative or a family friend say like, again, that kind of that civic pride, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that pride of place.
like that's the most important thing is that like people can't just Airbnb their house and get out of town. We need people to stay here. I hear that so much, like, oh, I'm Airbnb-ing, and I'm gonna get out of Dodge. No, you gotta stay. People have to stay. There's gonna be so many amazing things that happen here. You're gonna want to be a part of it. You're gonna want to experience it. You're gonna want to be able to tell your kids and grandkids that you were here for this. And in fact, invite your family in. You know what I mean? Like, get out the air mattresses and invite the cousins and the aunts and uncles to come on down in 2026 and experience your Philadelphia, and take them to your favorite restaurants and your favorite parks and public spaces and your favorite small businesses. And let's make sure that we get that economic development spread wide around the city. Let's bring our friends and family in. And we're prepared at the visitor center to make sure everybody knows exactly what's happening so that they can spread the word and bring people in 26. But we need Philadelphians to stay here too.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, I'll be here. Right.
Thank you.
Everyone on the webinar will be here too. I think that's such an inspirational call. So speaking of that, I think Tom or Hazel, I don't know how we're gonna best kind of, or Andrew's coming back, open the chat for some questions, either to Kathryn or me or both of us.
Questions Did
You
you want me to
can?
just read them? Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with you, but I can see everything.
That's another webinar for
Andrew, should I
sure.
go through the questions? I love question number 1.
Yeah, take the questions that are exciting to you. We've only got about 4 minutes.
Okay. Was there any move to insert public space into the 76ers arena proposal? There was like a soft bet on the under over of who would ask the first arena question. And if
Yeah.
so, what was the proposal? I did not see a public space proposal, but I think that it was, it was a mistake not to have one. And I am glad that this question was raised, because I think whatever the plan is for Market East, and I hope we build one, that it has to have a public space element to it. So great question,
Yeah.
and that would
And
be my vote.
and just a little bit. So Lindy did a little bit of a deep dive in what was being proposed for Market East. And it was kind of lacking at best, right? I think, Comcast, the plaza at the Comcast Center is bigger than what was being proposed. So if you go to Lindy Institute Civic Design Studio, you can kind of see where we kind of did that deeper dive if you're interested. And you also see like other cities that have proposed downtown arenas where they do integrate public space. But I think to your point, Kathryn, you can see some of the things that are happening, farther up on Market East, like what Jefferson is doing, and somehow some of that development is integrating public space in, a high quality, impactful way. So it's happening, right? But it should happen more and more all the way down to, where you are from City Hall, really river to river. But
Yeah, I will just say too, if we only have time for one more, someone mentions, what are some ways to go about changing the perception of Parks and Rec for the average person, for elected officials. I'm grateful for the question. I think that our biggest shortcoming here, it's not an exact answer to your question, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I promised to talk about this in every public forum I have since I left Parks and Recreation. People have got to be more vocal about their desire to see more funding go to Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. People have got to be more vocal. We are losing in the advocacy game here in Philly. Check out New Yorkers for Parks in New York City. That is the model we need to build in Philadelphia. We did have an advocacy organization, the Philadelphia Parks Alliance. They no longer exist. There is now no organization doing parks advocacy in the city of Philadelphia, right? So we are never, ever going to shift this, forget the narrative. We are never, ever going to shift the reality unless we up our advocacy game for parks and recreation in the city of Philadelphia. And people need to step up and figure out how they can help.
yeah, and we actually have the 1% for the New Yorkers for Parks have a 1% for park, so 1% for park campaign in New York City, which is basically advocating for 1% of the New York City's municipal budget for parks and rec, which would be well over $1 billion, a billion with a B.
And Malcolm Burnley just did a really good article on Rebuild for The Citizen last week that I think is a really good overview of some of the issues, the historic funding issues that the city has. And we're just never, ever going to fix anything unless we figure out the funding situation. We need a dedicated funding source for Parks and Recreation. I don't know where it's going to come from, but we need one.
Yeah.
We can no longer be relying on the general fund for funding.
Yeah, and again, we're a city of first, but this is one instance of many where we're the city of last, where there's not a city urban park system as big as Philadelphia that doesn't have that dedicated funding mechanism that Kathryn mentioned. We're just historically, we're just so behind, on that effort. And I saw there was a question in the chat about operations. Yeah, so it's dedicated funding for maintenance and operation and programming, but it's also capital. So rebuild is happening because the department doesn't have a mechanism to go to the bond market like the airport does or the water department. When we were in Parks and Rec, Kathryn and, our colleague at the time, would have to kind of go beg for capital funding for fire alarms. So, again, I think these are just raising the awareness is important. And then, Philly is a small city of 1.5 million people, calling your local council person, not just during budget season, but, more frequently just to kind of, talk about the importance of this and say that, we don't want a 32nd ranked park system here. I do see a question about, not to put you in a weird spot, but has there ever been a proposal for a playground on Independence Mall?
And no, it'll never happen. You're not allowed to play on the mall. I'm not kidding. You can even throw a Frisbee. It's like a rule.
Wait, you can't throw a Frisbee?
There's people who do, but you're not supposed to.
Okay,
No
sorry, I don't want to
recreation
get
on the mall. It's supposed to be a place for reflection about democracy, I think.
Okay.
But you can watch movies if you
You can
reflect on democracy while you're watching.
have a beer. Yeah.
We also showed Six Sons. That wasn't a lot of democracy in that, but it was great. It was really fun to watch that on the mall too. So
that was great. It was extra scary too. I mean, yeah.
I'm gonna bust in, Patrick and Kathryn, and just give you each a chance to offer us a last word. The conversation feels like it's actually just getting started, but I know for you guys it's a continuation of a long one. And we have benefited so much from being able to listen in and to ask questions. And we'll save the chat, and maybe some of us will get back to some of these folks because these are really amazing questions. But just as we start to round out, just a word of of thinking about the future, maybe.
you go, Patrick.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic, right? I would say, even as a Philadelphian, it's it's not in my DNA to be, but I think I completely agree with what Kathryn said around advocacy. It needs to be, for our public spaces to truly have the bright and inclusive future that I think we all kind of want for them. It takes many voices. The Park Friends Network, the advisory councils, have been kind of putting in the sweat equity. I think now is the time, or we're coming up to a time where it's like that sweat equity has to be met with more and more people. And on the advocacy side. So
Yeah,
I'm
for me, it's don't complain about stuff if you haven't advocated for it. Just please don't post anything or talk about anything if you haven't done your part to advocate for it, right? And I will say that I am optimistic too. The rebuild initiative, that's a whole other webinar, but the soda tax for that initiative, that was tried and failed how many times in New York and Philadelphia, right? And the reason it worked, right, was because it was connected, right, not to a budget hole, but to something that was deeply personal to Philadelphians, right, which is parks, recreation, libraries, playgrounds, right? And that topic that was so important to Philadelphians that they were ready, willing, and able to pay a soda tax, right, which for me is very expensive. But I say build soda, drink soda, build parks. That's literally was my motto, right? It became my civic duty to drink soda. But that said, I think that gives me the sense that if we really were to focus on an advocacy game here in Philadelphia, that it would be met incredibly well, because people really do love their Parks and Rec system. It's deeply personal to them, and they would support it if we could organize.
Yeah, and as Leslie Knope would say, they care very loudly.
Yeah,
so yes.
Well, on that note, I just want to underscore this idea that democracy is a thing that we make, and we make it together, and that as the world turns, we can have different arrangements. We can have different connections in politics and laws and personnel in these roles if we all get together and do our part and exert our civic our participation and do it in solidarity with one another across many different differences. And so what we've talked about here today has been a testament to both the opportunity and the need for that. And so thank you so much, Kathryn, for joining us, and thank you, Patrick, for hosting. The Urban Strategy program at Drexel is an opportunity to take a deep dive into these questions with people who teach courses like Patrick, with people like Kathryn who come into our courses and share their war stories and their hopes for this city. And it is an opportunity to really think deeply about how to transform urban systems to be accountable to their people. We'll put a link in the chat to the Urban Strategy Master's Program. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to me through that. We'll be back next month with Matt Rader from the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, and more to come in the spring. And encourage you to keep in touch with us and join us again. Thank you to Thomas Devaney and Hazel DeKito and the team at the Lindy Institute for making this possible. Thank you all for attending and for giving us your attention and your questions. And this conversation goes on and will go on. So we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.